Going out to eat can be an enjoyable time spent with friends and family. You might end up eating some delicious food and sharing a few laughs. Then the bill comes. You might offer to pay and sit there trying to calculate a tip. Is 20% enough? Does the tax count towards it? An argument starts with your mom telling you to tip a little more because the service was really good, and your dad yelling, saying the waiter took forever to get everyone more breadsticks. You struggle through this, and all you want to do is pay for the meal properly. But why should you? Why are you tipping in the first place? Shouldn't you just pay for how much the food costs and leave with no fuss? With all that confusion, should tipping in restaurants be banned? I believe tipping in restaurants should be banned in America because tipping has not always been a part of American culture. Restaurants still give great service in other cultures despite the lack of tipping, and the service quality does not really affect how much the customer will end up tipping. As a former fast food worker, I surprisingly was not allowed to take tips. I was paid minimum wage instead. At my current job, I deliver people's new phones to them and help them set them up. I'm not allowed to accept tips at this job either, and still provide incredible service because that is just my job. I also worked as a food delivery driver for a period of time, where tipping was expected. I was often very frustrated getting paid this way. Often people would tip nothing, and some nights I would make very little. Other times I would get lucky and get a good tip, but it was seemingly random. Tipping has not always been a part of an American culture. According to a 2005 article called Check Please from The New Yorker, tipping did not come about in America until the Civil War. It also says when it did, anti-tipping associations were formed. Newspapers, including The Times, regularly denounced the custom. You could argue that banning tipping is un-American, but tipping never was a well-liked part of our culture. In fact, the restaurants should simply pay the employees like they should, instead of the customer having to pay for most of it. If you were to go to a store and buy a computer, for example, are you expected to decide if the person who stocked that computer on the shelf should get paid that day? You might have traveled to parts of Europe or Asia and noticed that you don't need to tip there at all. Even if you haven't experienced this, do you think the waiter will be slow or not really care about their job because they aren't getting a tip? The answer is definitely no. So, here's a map of the world, and as you can see, in red, it is the countries where tipping is accepted or often expected, and in blue, it's kind of in between. It'll say on the bill whether it's expected for you to tip or not. A lot of places you won't tip, some places you will, and in the black, in countries like Australia and Japan, tipping is not expected, and it can even be seen as rude in some of those places. So, restaurants still give great service in other cultures despite the lack of tipping. A 2013 article titled, "Do You Tip in Japan? Japanese Tipping Etiquette," written in 2013, written by James Mundy, talks about how tipping in Japan can sometimes even be seen as rude. Many people choose to do their jobs with pride instead of hoping for a tip. Restaurants are still able to pay their workers, and customers experience no downsides because of it. Waiters and waitresses always try to provide the best service in hopes of a better tip. Sadly, most of the time, going that extra mile doesn't really get them more money. A 2000 Cornell University study called "The Relationship Between Tipping and Service Quality" proves that people still tip the same amount regardless of the service they received. You might have been to a restaurant and received poor or slow service, but your mind often rationalizes it that it's the kitchen's fault and not your waiter's. Or if the waiter was actually rude, you might still tip, but just slightly less. It takes either a very terrible experience or a really outstanding positive experience to alter the tip. In the end, most people feel strange about tipping a different amount than usual. They understand that people make mistakes and don't want them to get paid less because of one mistake. But why should you be deciding this anyway? You are tipping at the end of the meal, which means you can't tip for better service up front. Your tip almost acts as a rating for your service, with most people putting 5 stars because they don't want to cause any trouble or upset someone. But did you come to the restaurant to judge someone's work? You shouldn't, because you're not the boss. All in all, Tipping should be banned from restaurants in America. There's really no need for it, and it causes more frustration than necessary. Paying for your food should be like paying for anything else. You pay for what the bill says, no questions asked. This way we can make sure the millions of waiters and waitresses across the country can receive a steady and predictable income. As a customer, you don't have to do math tests after every meal or really figure anything out. We can improve our country by getting rid of this outdated and unnecessary practice. Millions of customer service jobs don't feature tipping, and customers still receive excellent service. With restaurants being a billion-dollar industry, they should be able to afford to pay their workers. Tipping is the strange loophole that allows the employer to pay their employees less and expect the customer to make up for that lack of pay. Whether you usually tip 15 or 20%, think about what it would be like to not have to do any of that and just pay for what the food costs.